Welcome back to our class on positivity bias. We're on to chapter 15. Topic is illumination, not elimination. And I think this is one of the harder pieces, right? This is one of the harder pieces because it kind of works to, in those challenging moments when we have such a temptation to go the negative route because of the situation, and to try and take the high road. That can be, really, really challenging. But that's the job in front of us, right? So he begins the story with someone who was coming to the Rebbe, and he was coming with a crisis of faith, and he loves the rituals and the customs and things, but as far as his relationship with God, he was really struggling with this, right? And the Rebbe didn't ask any big major change. He asked him, will you take on one positive mitzvah, right? Will you light Shabbos candles? With you and your wife, would you light Shabbos candles Friday night? That's it. Add some light to the world, right? But what happened over time, once they accepted that idea, is that they got together for Friday night, and it became kind of a family thing, that time together, and family dinners became a thing again. I mean, I grew up when we always had family dinners every night. We had family dinners, right? But it seems that's kind of faded over years now. My last kids, we didn't have family dinners. We just ate as they ran to the next activity they were doing, right? But Friday night was always a time when everyone came together, because that was the one thing that brought it together. And even though the Rebbe only asked of him this one mitzvah, that one mitzvah took on a life of its own and brought the family together. And then it was not only Shabbos candles, but it was a dinner, and it became a sacrosanct that everyone would be there, and it made it a huge impact. And I think that's the idea that the Rebbe wants to bring out here, is that every mitzvah starts a train of one car after another, right? Every mitzvah brings along another mitzvah along after with it as well. And you start to light up the world. One thing after another brings more and more good things to light. And it becomes, how many service members, they get out to field and they want to have that Shabbos something, whether it's a Friday night dinner or some type of thing to get together that's around Shabbos. I'm hosting a Friday night dinner at the National Conference, and we have about 25 people coming. 25 people coming.
You want more?
And let me know who you want to invite, Eliron. Absolutely. We definitely have. But we have a couple of previous national commanders coming. We have the outgoing chief of chaplains, the incoming chief of chaplains. We have a number of people coming to the event, and it's just a time to get together. And I think that's the beauty of the mitzvahs, one piece.
How many of those who are coming are not either past national commanders or chaplains?
I'm going to say at least a quarter. At least a quarter are not even in the chaplain corps at all. They're just people that we've met. They were invited and they love to come.
Did you invite the Chabad?
Chabad rabbi?
Yes.
No, because he's responsible that night and he's not within walking distance.
But
I will say I'm coming on Wednesday, and I'm going to be going to Fort Sam Houston. The Jewish chaplain at Fort Sam Houston, he and his wife and his kids, it's kind of a lonely outpost for them. And so I'm going to go liven up the day on Wednesday, spend the night with them. And Thursday, I'll check in at the conference.
the Fort Sam, you said the Fort Sam Houston one?
Right.
We have a very active Jewish program within, I guess, Lackland Air Force Base. There's a lot of drama going on between the bases, so they don't like. There's a lot of they don't like intermingling between Fort Sam and Lackland.
Okay. Well, the rabbi at Fort Sam is a friend of mine, and when he was deployed, when last time I was in San Antonio, I made sure I stopped over there and built their sukkah because Dad was deployed, and that gave them a hand to help build their sukkah before I left. So, yeah. But again, it's so back to the topic here, which is about illumination, right? So there's a second story here where there was the Rebbe was listening to an artist, and the artist had shared all of his problems and all the areas that he's not invested in God and not invested in Torah mitzvahs, and he was sharing all these negative things, right? I mean, how many times I've heard someone say, "I'm not a good Jew," right? They're making their own self-assessment. Well, that's not the Rebbe's view, right? And so this guy is sharing all those things, and the Rebbe listened to him, and he said, "Would you start putting on tefillin, and would you remarry your wife in a proper Jewish kuppah?" He didn't ask much. He just said, could you have another party for another wedding party, make it a Jewish wedding, and put on tefillin? And he committed to that. It's not that he's keeping kosher. It's not that he's changing the artwork that he's doing, but he would do this mitzvah, right? Well, taking time to put on tefillin in the morning and have that commune with God, time for a little bit of prayer, whether it's 5 minutes, whether it's 15 minutes, whether it's a half hour, taking that time for meditation and connection to God changed his day. And now it's something he can't do without. Now it's totally precious to him. So it's lighting a little bit of light, bringing a little bit of light into a dark situation can change things. And it makes a huge difference, right? The next story here was about Chaim Cohen. Chaim Cohen, who grew up as an Orthodox Jew, right? But over years, he left all of that. He had a very successful career as a judge, and he was eventually appointed to Israel's Supreme Court. They say that smokers are the worst person to light up a cigarette next to.
Yeah.
Once you stop, now you come with a vengeance, right?
Nope.
So this Chaim Cohen, he became very anti anything Orthodox Jewish when he was in the Supreme Court in Israel. Anything that they tried to get support in or pass, he was staunchly against it, and he had a reputation. He had a tremendous reputation. In fact, one of the things that he was involved in was the law of return in Israel stated that you have to have a law of return as anyone who is halachically Jewish, according to Jewish law. And he was one of those who had it removed, the word halachically. So anybody could come and someone could say, "I'm Jewish," and they could come in and that's it. And then they had full rights. And so it was a big blow, and it was something the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke very harshly against, changing that rule. So you have this Chaim Cohen in his position at the Israeli Supreme Court, and the Rebbe this topic of debate was very hard and rough, and the Rebbe was opposing ends to this Chaim Cohen, right? And then 1975, this Chaim Cohen, Jeff, we'll see you later. This Chaim Cohen, he shows up in Lubavitch World Headquarters on Simchas Torah for the holiday of Simchas Torah. Now, of course, everybody in the room knows who he is. A lot of people in the room know who he is, right? And there was an understanding that this guy who's caused so much trouble for the Orthodox Jewish world, and he comes into the shul, and if we give him any honor or respect, like, how do you do that? Number one, He's being so against everything we've been standing for. Number one. Number two, the rest of the Orthodox Jewish world will be appalled if we give him any kind of honors like calling up to the Torah or something like that. So the Gaboyim in 770, the Gabbai in 770, he went to the Rebbe and asked, like, what do we do? And the Rebbe's response is, a Jew comes for Simchas Torah to celebrate with the Torah. Call him up, give him an honor, let him dance with the Torah. And he was given a hakafa to lead the dancing for a Torah. And when he was dancing, the Rebbe kept the clapping going and kept encouraging and the singing and getting it, more and more intense. That dance lasted over 20 minutes with this guy carrying the Sefer Torah the whole time. And the intention was, again, put all the arguments aside. A Jew wants to come and celebrate at Simchas Torah, comes to connect with God. That's what we do. That's what we're here for, right? It's funny because, on a side note, a few years later, there was a Chabad rabbi in Manhattan who was encouraging one of the guys he was connecting with, one of the lawyers he was connecting with, to come to visit Chabad headquarters and the Rebbe. And the guy said, I'm not coming anywhere near your Rebbe. He turned Chaim Cohen around completely with love. I'm not coming near your Rebbe. But that's the idea, right? If we're there to spread light and love and truth and peace, there's no room for adversarial positions and opponents. We want to add light, we want to add Torah, and that's what we come to do. And it can be, that was a very difficult situation, very challenging situation, right? But the idea then comes down to a common Hasidic idea that a little light dispels a lot of darkness. A little light dispels a lot of darkness. And that's it. The world is a very dark place, a very spiritually dark place. Every single mitzvah makes a huge difference. Lighting Shabbos candles one time, putting on tefillin one time, it changes the dynamics because it's a little bit of light in a very dark environment, right? There's a story here about a Jewish executive who ran a South African advertising agency, and he accepted the responsibility for advertising the public image of the African National Congress. And one day he walks in and he sees a picture of Yasser Arafat, and he wanted to leave. He wanted to, I don't want to work with an organization that has a poster of this guy up in their building, right? And so he spoke with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he wrote to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe said that not only you should not stop working for them, on contrary, continue to work for them because you now have an opportunity to have an influence for good, right? If you go away, then you have no influence. If you stick around and you help them, you might actually have a good influence on changing some of their attitudes and, again, lighting up a dark side. And that's the job. The job is to find a way to add good things into challenging situations, add beauty to dark situation, bring in the light. That's the job, right? Next story was Alan Dershowitz.
Ooh. A
Alan
good friend
Dershowitz.
of mine, a
Say
very
again?
dear friend of mine, went to school with Dershowitz. They were both in law school together. And he said at the time, Dershowitz was a great talker. Surprise, surprise. But mostly about himself. And then he said at reunions that they would have, Dershowitz would come and he would talk and talk and talk but he was a Trumper. And that's the sole topic of conversation. Others in the graduating class could talk about all kinds of things, but not Dershowitz. He was very narrow and very, very jaded in what he said. So with that as an observation from someone who went to school with him, you want to go on?
So because he was well known and very much involved in the Jewish world, so he had many interactions with the Lubavitcher Rebbe over the years. And at one point, the Dershowitz actually wrote to the Rebbe very strongly, very chutzpahdik, because he had read that Jesse Helms was being honored at the Education Day Gala, and Jesse Helms was actually an opposite ends for anything that Dershowitz was involved in. And Dershowitz wrote to them, how can you honor this guy who has done nothing good for the Jewish people or for the state of Israel? Everything he stands for is against Jewish American values, right? That was Dershowitz's comment, right? And the Rebbe's response to Dershowitz was, we never give up on anyone. And we don't honor people necessarily for what they've done, but for what they might yet do. And over time, that positive attitude had a very big impact on Jesse Helms, who then very much became, in many ways, an advocate for the state of Israel and Jews in the state of Israel as well. And so, you know, it's how to bring out the positive in every situation, every individual, how to light a light in the darkness, you know, so that it can be that there's an individual who's just very, very dark and everything is negative. How do you shine a light in there? How do you bring the light in? How do you make things, help them see a positive things, right? One of the conversations that we discuss here is also, there is a very strong movement called Jews for Jesus. And basically it is a Christian movement that has, you know, I guess the Inquisition didn't work and the Crusades didn't work. So let's try something else, right? And so 50 years ago, the Jews for J movement was very much a proselytizing, directly trying to proselytize Jews. That has morphed into what is now called Messianic Judaism. There's, you know, 99% of the people in Messianic Judaism are not Jewish, but their goal is to proselytize Jews. And so they figured, okay, well, let's dress like them, let's behave like them, let's call it a temple, let's do all the things and call ourselves Messianic Jews, because that's the next method of trying to convert Jews to Christianity. Totally 100% proselytizing, right? When you see Jews get caught up in something like that, how do you argue with them? How do you work with them to help them understand that, you know, what you're getting involved in, the negative side of that, right? And the Rebbe's point was, don't argue with them about claims about Christianity. Talk about something about Judaism and get them to light Shabbos candles, get them to put on tefillin, get them to take on a real mitzvah. And instead of trying to argue and fight with the darkness, just bring in more light, and the light will dissipate the darkness of its own. The more person gets involved in Torah and mitzvahs, the more the other stuff just dissipates and falls apart on its own. So again, the Rebbe's directive is not about, you know, taking it head on and trying to fight with darkness. One of the, you know, the old saying about you can't shovel out darkness, but you can bring in light and it disappears of its own. Right? Don't put the energy into fighting darkness. Put the energy in to bringing more light into the situation. On September 24th, 2009, one day after Gaddafi held court at the UN, advocating hatred and lies about Israel, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu addressed the UN, and he opened with a personal story. He said in 1984, he had been serving as Israel's ambassador to the UN, and he asked to meet with the Rebbe in Brooklyn. When he was at the UN for New York, he asked to meet with the Rebbe in Brooklyn. He came to 770, it was Simchas Torah, and obviously the Simchas Torah celebration is supposed to go on, but he actually ended up spending quiet one-on-one time in the midst of the crowd talking to the Rebbe. And he said that the Rebbe told him regarding his ambassadorship to the UN, the Rebbe told him, "You are going to a house of lies. Remember that in a hall of perfect darkness, if you light one small candle, its light will be seen from afar by everyone. Your mission is to light a candle for truth and the Jewish people." And then that story is what Benjamin Netanyahu actually said at the UN. He shared his story that the Rebbe had said, "You're going to a house of lies, in a place of complete darkness, add a light, and everyone will be drawn." So that's the idea of just focusing on the positive things that we can do and the light that we can add. And we finish off the story here actually with a story from the Gemara. The story from the Gemara is Rabbi Meir and his brilliant wife Bruria. The Talmud tells us a story that there are certain lawless men in the vicinity that they were living in, and they used to cause him constant suffering. And in response, Rabbi Meir prayed that these lawless men would die. His wife, God bless her, she argued, the Pasuk says, quoting a verse from the Gemara, right? The Pasuk says here, "Let sins cease." She argued, it's the sins that should cease, not the sinners. Let them repent, and the sins are no more. So don't pray for the death of the sinners. Pray for their repentance. Pray for to see a new light. And the Rebbe was bringing this up in the context of when fighting the PLO, we don't have to pray that the enemy should die, but rather we should pray that they should have a change of heart. And it's so easy to be the cynical one and to say that doesn't work and they never change, right? It's easy to go the cynical route. The Rebbe is demanding that we take the high road and look for the positive change, that we bring in light, we bring in goodness, and the Rebbe is not saying that in time of war you can't do what you have to do in a time of war. There is a responsibility, and the Rebbe has talked many times about, the Gemara says that if there's a rumor that the enemy is going to cross the border to steal grain, not to fight or kill, just to steal grain, it is our obligation to start a preemptive attack to prevent that from happening. So the Rebbe is not saying don't defend yourselves and turn the other cheek. That's not a Jewish idea. Evil has to be met head on. But at the same time, the prayer and the focus is how to change the individuals to good, not to destroy them. How to bring in light to a dark situation, how to make things better, not by destroying the enemy, but by helping them see a different way. We had previously talked about war ethics and the idea of when is it ethical to enter a war, when is it ethical, how is it ethical to fight in that war, and then post-war, what are the responsibilities? And to me, I think back on Abraham Lincoln. Abraham Lincoln was very, very strong about, we had our war, now reconstruct the South, rebuild the South, and this is our own people, how to rebuild, right? Those are the ethics post-war. We're not at war anymore. Bring in light, change things, make things happen better.
I think there's a
that's-
phrase, with
Go ahead.
malice toward none. With malice toward none, I think is what he said, somewhere there.
With malice towards none. Right.
And
And I
charity
think
for all.
if we
And
look
charity
at,
for all.
yeah, absolutely. If we look at post-World War I and the Versailles Treaty, you were just setting up for World War II.
Yeah.
It was just so horrendous, right? The conditions, and people were seeking revenge. It wasn't about how to go on in peace. It was about seeking revenge. But if we look at post-World War II,
Different
and
story.
U.S.-Japan relations even, right? So it's a whole different story. That's about post-war ethics. The same idea here is that it's not about destroying the enemy, even on a small one-on-one situation, on an argumentative thing. It's not about, winning the argument as much as it is about helping them see a different side. And shining in the light. My visual example for this in my own head is a living room full of people where there's no light in the room, and people are, knocking their shins against the table and falling on top of each other, and there's screaming and aggression, and there's all kinds of emotions, right? And somebody turns on the light. Oh, sorry, didn't mean to step on you, right?
Yeah. So it was said about Eleanor Roosevelt. She would rather light a candle than curse the darkness.
Right. But that takes action. It's easier to curse the darkness than it is to actually light a candle and make the room brighter. It's much harder to maintain a positive, upbeat attitude in the face of arguments and challenges. But that's the task. That's the task from Judaism, is to bring in light, not darkness. Thoughts on the conversation? Topic again, the topic was illumination and not elimination.
I'm fascinated by your discussion about ethics in war, and I can certainly understand how the victors in a war can afford to be ethical with those that they've defeated, with the treatment of those whom they've defeated. Ethics during the war are entirely different. And one of the things that I find very interesting is how we, that is the world, condemns the wholesale slaughter of innocents, people whom I consider to be innocents in Gaza, in efforts to destroy Hamas, if you can separate them from innocent civilians. But this country during World War II had no problem at all with that. When we were the ones in the war. And we thought nothing of wholesale slaughter of populations in efforts to stop the German war machinery. For instance, in the fire bombings, Dresden and other places. So I find that this country's concept of ethics, or right and wrong, is so changed depending on whose war it is. It's kind of like justice. There is no such thing as an objective justice. Justice depends on who wins. If I win, justice was served. If you win, there's no justice. And that's universal.
A lot of truth
I
to
think-
that.
But I
The-
think that discussion, particularly with kids, about the ethics of war, not pre-war or post-war, but war, is really fascinating. That you would embark in that, and I'm really interested in what the kids have to say.
Yeah, and I
Speech.
think one of the, on that conversation, back to our idea here, Israel is judged by a double standard throughout the world. It's,
Yeah.
everybody else can do one thing, but Israel's not allowed to do the same thing, right? And yet, there are so many things that Israel does to prevent the civilian casualties, whether it's dropping leaflets to say, hey, we're going to bomb this area, get out of here, which of course there's another war ethic. Hang on, let's go back to this topic. So the idea is that finishing this class up on the idea of adding more light, and obviously education is one way of adding more light, helping people with critical thinking skills and asking good questions and maybe to, choosing to understand more of the environment, the situation. That's harder to do than just go with the flow and see whatever the popular comments is going on, right? We've seen on campus where people are shouting from the river to the sea, and yet if someone comes up and asks, by the way, what river is that? What sea is that? And they have no idea.
Yeah.
Right? So to take the time to actually learn truth about what's going on is much harder than just getting out there and crying, getting a battle cry and getting into that one. So the hard road is to really look into facts and understand and bring in light, bring in understanding. That's the big challenge.